And we're so glad that you're with us today. We miss you. We're getting to connect with you in many different ways, but definitely feeling the impact of not getting to physically hug your neck, to see you in person. You know, one of the things that I was laughing about this week is so often I'm reminded of everyone's name by interacting with those people. And I thought, will I remember anybody in the congregation's name when, when we all get back together? Hopefully it won't be that long, right? If there's anything that we can say that this pandemic is calling us into, it's to be adaptable, We're being asked to change, and in some ways we're being forced to change. And if we're not going to change, we're going to suffer. But the good news is that our true nature is all about change. It's adaptive. It responds to life, and it brings with it a certain inspiration and a creativity that help us to unfold our life with the greatest potential possible, that we thrive when we are living out of our nature that we call the Christ, or we these days so often call just our true nature. The challenge is that for many of us, change tends to put pressure on our ego structure. And when the ego structure comes up, not so much about change. It's much more about a patterned way of being. It has its patterned way of responses. It reacts to life, not responding. And in that reacting, we are cut off from our nature, and we often suffer. The good news is that while the ego is structured inside of us, it's not fixed. In other words, it's responsive. It responds when we take the time to come to understand the underlying beliefs that it's based on, when we come to understand the different trauma and pain that it went through, when it feels seen and understood, then it tends to relax and to drop us back into the experience of our true nature. This spring, we're working with Tara Brach's, I'm going to get that name correct, Tara Brach's book, Radical Compassion. She is introducing us to the process that she calls RAIN, which is a beautiful process from transitioning to this sort of stuck place of the ego where we're caught in our reactivity, where we're caught in our pain and in our frustration, and inviting us to take a deep dive. She does that through this RAIN process, which is an acronym for recognize, allow, investigate, and then nurture. And when the ego begins to feel that sense of being understood, of being attuned to, inevitably it drops us off again in our nature. This week we're working with chapters 4 and 5. And here Tara gives us some great insight, let's say, into how we can break the trance of the ego and begin that process of dropping in. She introduces to the idea that all of us, and this is very true, all of us come out of our childhood with the belief that there's something wrong with us. Maybe you already are in touch with that. If so, I'm not asking you to write out what your core belief about what's wrong with you in the comments section, but you can give us a little thumbs up or something. Don't worry if you're not aware of it, because we're so used to it, and we're so used to the shame that it creates in us. Tara has this to say about shame. The core feeling of shame is a sense of personal badness, and with shame comes self-aversion, fear, and the urge to hide. We're isolated, no longer a part of the circle of life. The medicine for shame is radical compassion, the loving presence that helps us trust our belonging and essential goodness. Shame is created by judgment. At least toxic shame is. Outside judgment and the judgment that comes from our inner judge, or what Freud called the superego. And when judgment comes, we tend to pull away out of that shame. We don't want anybody to know what might be discovered as being wrong with us. For me, those words speak to it pretty well. There's something wrong with you. That's what I heard my father say when I was a kid. You know, my dad had, as probably a lot of men of that age group had, a strong idea of what a boy would be, should be. And I simply didn't fit the mold. And as our egos do, it's important to understand that the ego has an idea of how something should be, and when it doesn't fit the mold, then we try to change so that it will fit the mold. We don't change ourselves, we change whatever is outside, whatever the stimulus. In my case, my dad would, in one phraseology or another, let me know that there was something wrong with me. For years, I couldn't figure out what that was. He didn't really ever clarify, but as I got older, I came to understand that I wasn't boy enough, I wasn't tough enough, I wasn't an athlete enough, that I was too interested in creating things and making things beautiful, in doing things in the kitchen where I shouldn't be. I was definitely made to feel a certain level of shame about who I was. And then it's important to understand that then we collect all sorts of evidence. So not only did I have my dad pointing out that I wasn't being boy enough, but then I would be the one that would be singled out of a group to be teased, to be bullied. And you begin to I began to go, my God, they're seeing something in me. They're seeing what's wrong with me, even if I'm not seeing it clearly. And I learned to both isolate and to accommodate. So I want to spend some time taking you through the RAIN process, an example of the RAIN process. Because while the acronym and the steps are easy enough, the process is actually challenging and invites us often into a territory that we don't understand. 2 weeks ago, I talked about how I had this amazing experience of strong essential energies rising in me to reveal to me that I just naturally knee-jerk go to accommodating when people express frustration in me or in something that I have done. I, that weekend, felt strong and powerful and big. That perspective allowed me to see more clearly. But I woke up on Monday morning and I did not feel good. I felt small and vulnerable and afraid. And that was the opportunity to realize that something was going on. Step one. And I went to my body. Tara says this about the importance of going to our body. Our beliefs live not only in our mind, but in a constellation of feelings and emotions embedded in our bodies. As a favorite saying goes, our issues are in our tissues. They are deeply familiar. I love that she pointed out that they are deeply familiar. For you see, while I have been practicing the RAIN process, I call it something else, inquiry, for over 20 years, At first, I couldn't even recognize that I was being judged from an internal judge. It was so familiar that it just seemed like it was the guiding voice inside of me. I didn't even recognize it as being harmful, as creating shame in me, as being a force that held me in this trance of separating, accommodating. And so I went to my body. I was experiencing a great deal of discomfort in my solar plexus, which is a sure sign for all of us that we are under attack. And so I went to allowing. I allowed, not for very long. I have a different perspective on attack than Tara does, Tara. But I wanted to hear what the attack was about. And it was an absolute assurance that while as a child I got to choose to isolate in order to be safe, that if I didn't accommodate, if I didn't meet the needs of the people around me when they were frustrated with me, that I would be forced into isolation, that I wouldn't have a congregation anymore, that I wouldn't have any friends. Now, at that point, I defend against the judge. I put up a boundary. I'm sorry, I was searching for that word. What is that word? I put up a boundary, and here's why. In my mind, and actually from the reading I've done, when our inner judge comes in to attack us, it is not attacking the adult of us. It is attacking our inner child. And so it would be like walking up to a situation where an 18-year-old is beating up a 4-year-old and just standing there and allowing it. That is totally unacceptable to me. For one, the judge has such a loud voice, and there's no way to hear the child in that it just holds you at this place of reactivity, of just being contracted, of being assured, right, that you need to go back to your prior behavior. So I set a boundary. Sometimes I can just say, enough, judge, back off. It doesn't mean the judge is going to stop, but it allows me then to begin to hear the child. How many of you are aware of the voice of judgment? And remember, it starts as a feeling, but as you feel it into your body, you begin to get the words. And if not, again, don't judge yourself for not knowing your judge. It's very familiar. But as you're willing to set a boundary with the judge, you make room for the child. Another thing I want you to know, by the way, this is a familiar thing that happens to all of us. We feel some kind of essential quality come up to support us to breaking out of a pattern. We suddenly feel free and expansive. We're all excited about our new life. And the ego then contracts. It's like we've gotten too big. It can't control us anymore. And it contracts and brings us back into what it feels will be a size that it can maintain. And it will be this assured feeling that you absolutely have to go back to the behaviors that you're familiar with, to the way of living that you're familiar with. And so, for me, what I want to say is if I'm dealing with a really core value, core issue for me, not a core value, a core issue, I rarely can work on it for myself. And I know that my ego is really good at helping me postpone things, procrastinate. So I have a RAIN session at 9 o'clock every Monday. Every Tuesday I have one at 8:30, and every Friday it fluctuates, but every Friday I have one. We always set the time for the next one before we hang up off the phone the current Friday. And I went into a RAIN session at 9 o'clock that morning. And I was reconnected again with the fear. There was a lot of fear up. But I wasn't, and I could feel the fear, and I could explore the fear from different directions, but it wasn't resolving like it did the weekend before. In fact, I left the session feeling like I understood more about the fear, but not sure. The same thing happened on Tuesday. I understood a little bit more, but didn't feel like I got to the real resolution. How do we know we've gotten to resolution in the RAIN process? Because there is a relaxing. When we have hit the issue on the head of the nail, inevitably, the ego relaxes and drops us back out into our true nature. Finally, on Friday, I got to the understanding that I was afraid that if I didn't accommodate, that more issues of where I was not enough, where I was deficient, where I had done it wrong would be revealed, that more would be seen in me, more would be pointed out. And suddenly this tension in my belly that had just been sort of a low-level tension became this tight, little, almost pea-sized knot in my belly. It was giving me nothing but discomfort. And I went back to allow. Okay, if there's nothing to investigate here, I'm just going to allow it and see what happens. And just after a couple of minutes, it was like a switchblade opened on that little pea, but it was more the size of my finger. And this blade just started slowly cutting through my belly. And for the first time, I could feel the pain. I could feel the pain of my dad saying there was something wrong with me. I could feel the pain of being teased and beat up. Or in my 20s, being heckled in meetings. I could feel the pain of being spit on, of having the word fag written on my car. And I allowed the pain. Just allowed it. And by the way, it felt really good to feel the pain. I had the understanding that the accommodation, see, there's an active role in accommodation. You immediately get busy in your mind. I realized it was a great defense that I really hadn't felt the pain of my childhood. If I had felt the pain, it would have only made things worse because I could feel how overwhelming it would have been to me as a kid, that I would have broken out crying, which would have just brought more attack from my dad, more attack from other boys. And I understood that as an adult, I could feel the pain, that it wasn't overwhelming to me as an adult. And within minutes, my belly released and relaxed. There was no more tight little pea, there was no more knife, there wasn't even any sense of being wounded. And I pulled that little boy close. And I told him that while I could not ensure that no one would judge us again, that I would never leave him alone in the judgment, that I would stand with him, and that I would take care of defending us, and that I loved him. And I found myself dropped into this spacious experience, just as Steve sang about in his 2 songs, that no matter what situation I found myself in, everything was going to be okay. I felt peaceful, still, expansive, quiet. And I stay with that experience every time because I'm so used to getting wrapped up into all the tension and tightness of life that we need to begin to pause and rest when our nature shows itself. Our nature is loving, peaceful. At times, it's strong and powerful. At others, it's compassionate and empathetic. It can manifest in literally dozens of ways. But it is our true nature, the place where we're connected, the place we're invited to live. And it's a joyful experience. In the book of James, there's a beautiful analogy that I think we can use. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. If you just leave that up for a while, what we get to see here is that our faith is in our true nature, not in our ego and all of the judgment and shame and the desire to hide some fact that there's something flawed in us. That when we're willing to leave this level of frustration and pain and sorrow and take the deep dive into what's really going on here, letting our body be the guide, that we find that the resulting true nature, after we have supported and understood what's going on for our ego, is in fact enduring, supports us through every situation, brings us to a sense of feeling mature and absolutely complete, that there is nothing wrong with us. Yes, there is absolute assurance in the moment of an ego attack that we must go back to our old ways. It's fun. I actually named this talk Real but Not True. To recognize how real it can feel that we have to go back into the patterns that have helped us survive. But if we ask ourselves, is it true that we will not thrive unless we go back to those patterns? Most of the time, if not all the time, we can say, no, it's not true. It's not true that I don't have friends that love me, despite the fact that I don't feel a need to accommodate with them. It's not true that this entire congregation would disappear if I stopped being an accommodator. It simply isn't true. Now, does it mean my life might change a little bit? This week, a friend asked me if I would do something for them. I checked in and I said, no, that doesn't feel right to me. And my friend, I could feel the pause on the other end of the phone as my friend said, well, that's new. Doesn't mean there won't be ramifications to letting go of the patterns. So, let's take a couple of deep breaths as we move into a short time of meditation together. Let whatever tensions in your body, let them be there, but breathe gently into them. One thing I didn't mention is I always breathe through the entire rain process. Breathing deeply into any constriction I find, breathing even into large expansion to make room for me, the truth of who I am, my true nature. And as you close your eyes and begin to settle into this moment, allow yourself just to be with whatever your experience is. No need to change it. But to gently begin to see beyond that experience. If it's one of tension or frustration or contraction, just to sense deeper into it. To sense with an open heart, with a curious mind. To be ready for that which needs to be revealed, to be revealed. And having set that intention, to now just relax, if you can, if your body will allow you. Let's relax for a few minutes in the midst of all this change. To relax into the truth that from the maturity of our true nature, everything is okay. Everything will be okay. All potential is being released now. And so we sit together now for a few minutes in the quiet.